Oh dear, I think I realised something. And that something is not good at all. That basically, I think the FIA has won. The drivers have lost. Because if my suspicions are correct, then I think the GPDA has lost one of its key speakers, thanks to Toto wanting him to just drive the car. In a rather sobering and depressing moment of clarity, a summary from Twitter user Mel21MV inspired me to look more deeply into the recent smatterings of FIA and Mercedes news. Now, over the last few days, I had seen some news bits here or there which did pique my curiosity, but there was no real way that I thought at the time that they were connected. However, that tweet from Mel snapped everything into focus for me, so prepare yourself for some maximum yap. The crux of this post is to do with the ongoing rumblings between the Association of Grand Prix Drivers, to which all 20 drivers are in solidarity by the way, and the FIA, more specifically, its own president, Mohammed bin Sulayem. Because as I have actually reported on this channel, the FIA has indeed responded to the open letter from the GPDA asking for more transparency and some clarity regarding the conduct of drivers and swearing, as well as many other things and where fines go, with Appendix B, that collection of penalties which are incredibly draconian. And unfortunately for the likes of Johnny Herbert, he's not around as an FIA steward anymore to be able to use them against Fernando Alonso in some way. Yeah, we've been critical of the FIA as of late, but removing Herbert from the role was a W where credit should be due, but this W is a fleeting one. I also say it's mainly Sulayem's folly, as reports from BBC Sport and others note that the decision to bring in Appendix B was rushed through an online vote at the last minute with minimal information attached to it, and not enough time to fully understand it by all the parties, and supposedly saw F1's own boss, Stefano Domenicali, vote against it. So you remember all the rhetoric after the whole 11th team debacle with Andretti, that Domenicali and Sulayem, they patched things up, they were unified, that they were one voice, they were working together for the better interest of the sport? Well, so much for that. That was short-lived. And with some other critics, including FIA insiders, they reckoned it was more of an impulsive move, a reaction from the president himself to make sure that his word is kept and that no one can speak out against it, because you've got to admit, the wording of some of these penalties clearly make it out that Sulayem's got something stuck in his craw, and that he personally wants to stop people that he thinks are going to oppose him. Most notably, the key spokesperson and lead representative amongst all of the drivers, George Russell. Because look at these penalties! Race bans, deductions of points, this is hitting the drivers where it hurts. And I know that this is an FIA directive, that this isn't just about Formula 1, but considering that Ben Sulayem won't keep his business out of F1 even though he promised to 2 years ago, yeah, this is aimed squarely at the drivers specifically, but everyone gets to suffer because of it. But yes, I'm sorry, if you're expecting Russell to come up with a blimey, we didn't really see that coming through, what a turn of events, this is really unfortunate for us, yeah, expect nothing from him anytime soon, or indeed ever again. And Russell's own boss is at the centre of it all, and might bring it into question all the freedoms and rights to speak one's mind that were granted to Lewis Hamilton when he arrived as a Mercedes driver, and now with them off to Ferrari. Could we see Toto now reverse his decisions regarding Lewis and clamp down on drivers' soundbites? Because you've only got to look at the way Toto has actually been expressing his own opinions regarding the FIA and how they've changed in the span of just 2 months. Because you've only got to look back to December. He came out with the quip saying, with the way the FIA is actually interacting with itself, it may as well be a reality show with the drama. Because seriously, that's one of the quotes. He's saying all the stuff, the drama about it, the swearing, George, Max, it was all parts and pieces that would be worthy of some kind of reality TV program where Ben Sulayem is the main character. And you do have to admit that main character syndrome is something that Ben seems to be dealing with a lot lately. But Wolff now has formally come out in support of the body's plans regarding penalties in relation to misconduct, swearing, speaking out of things which could bring the sport into disrepute. And the implications of this may be logical, but if the drivers want a change that might allow them to go racing with no holds barred, yeah, that's not going to happen. So on top of them having to drive a Formula 1 car at 200 miles an hour, the mental load that that has on them and the adrenaline that builds up, they're now having to think on the fly, oh, I better not swear, or I better be careful with what I say on the radio. And that's the thing. That is probably one of the main people who are responsible for the reason why the swearing debate and the idea of misconduct and conducting yourselves in a professional manner is even a topic. The F1 TV directors, they're the ones that you should really be pointing a finger at, because they're the ones that put out all the radio transmissions that we are supposedly going to find the most entertaining, because you gotta be admitting that the majority of these radio broadcasts, if they do contain a swear, you bleep it out, you're immediately going to cast more attention toward it because, oh, it's got a swear. And I think the majority of the time, the drivers are not going to be saying, after they've cussed, going, blimey, that was a really good swear, Toto. Tell the F1 director to use it. No one driver is going to be doing that. So really, the attention and focus should not be on the drivers, it should be on the directors to not put out that kind of stuff. But going back to that thing from December, aside from the whole reality show stuff with the FIA, Toto was in agreement with the GPDA about the whole idea of the FIA being accountable and transparent with itself, as it not being so would be a concern for the sport shareholders and financial backers, and that he was pleased the drivers were able to speak out and unite in their efforts to get the FIA to listen to them around a table. But note what I said about shareholders, because you've got to remember, paper-wise, Toto Wolff is a billionaire because of how successful Formula One is, and anything that could compromise it, be it the FIA acting in a silly way or the drivers speaking out and them potentially losing out on revenue, they lose points, which compromises Mercedes' efforts of being Constructors' champions again. Yeah, that's something to consider here. Toto is probably near close worth of $2 billion at this point. He really does not want to lose that revenue or that valuation before he chooses to retire, when he can actually claim that money. But anyway, here's what Toto had to say, and I know that you probably want me to do the impression, but I've got to keep some level of professionalism here. You know, it's just something to pay attention to. Building our own engine is a challenge that cannot be underestimated, but so is maintaining professionalism in F1. I think we want to see emotions in the car, and there are ways of showing that or not. Drivers are role models. We have a responsibility to ensure that our sports remains respectful and inspiring for the next generation. I think also we have a responsibility toward all the spectators. I believe particularly the non-native ones, the British, often don't understand how grave or how nuanced the word can be. In that respect, I think any initiative is good, and if we stop some of the bad swearing, that's positive. Maintaining professionalism in F1, eh, Toto? What about the whole thing about your Bose headphones in Jeddah 2021? When things weren't going your way, and then you just smashed them on the table? Yeah, sure, Bose got a little bit of a profit, but that wasn't really professional now, was it? And then the whole thing, the whole thing with Netflix, Drive to Survive, the legendary quote about Checo and the driver's car being absolutely messed up, but you used a more spicy word than that? That was broadcast. There were cameras there, Toto. So in your own words, and of course, let's not forget Las Vegas 2023, your diatribe where the FIA did impugnate you and Fred Vasseur for swearing. That's not exactly professional now, was it? But make no mistake, whilst it's perfectly reasonable for F1 drivers to be role models for younger drivers and children, you know, don't get into fisticuffs or drive like a loon and all that, the matter regarding cursing is something that the drivers shouldn't be really responsible for solely. And all that Wolff's statement does is put the onus on the racers to check themselves. But again, the F1 TV director should really be held accountable as well for putting all of that out for the entire broadcast feed of the world, as well as the press for latching onto it, and indeed, us content creators really falling into it. And I'm now actually seeing the absolute irony of why I'm making this video, because I'm talking about swearing, where in reality we should be really just emulating that one Simpsons episode of just don't look, ignore it, and the problem goes away. So yes, I'm part of the problem. I'm just gonna go now. Bye, I'm sorry for wasting your time. No, wait, don't actually leave, I need the watch time. But with the boss of Mercedes now towing the line with the FIA's president seemingly, and actually justifying his actions, this comes with its own implications for the future of the Grand Prix Drivers Association, and what potential leverage it may or may not have in future discussions, or at all, considering that Appendix B contains a rule where personal statements could be punished, it being right there, that either you get a fine or you have to retract it and then apologise for wasting the FIA's time. Because in theory, Article 12.2.1.0 means that all of the drivers, and by the way, the GPDA has the backing of all 20 active F1 drivers, each of them could be fined €40,000, which means that the FIA get €800,000 straight into their kitty. Yeah, yeah, and where that goes, we don't know anymore, because the FIA now no longer has an ethics and accountability committee as to where the fines go, because Ben Sulayem got rid of them. Okay, Law, so it's the FIA, Toto, alright, I get it, but what else does he have to do with this story that actually constitutes a long video of yours? Well, this does require some critical thinking and evaluating of all the sources that we have seen. If you look at it all in stark relief, then maybe you might be able to get the indication that George Russell's position as the leader of the GPDA's driver's side of things is pretty much going to be coming to an end where you barely hear him talk, because it's all about the championship, because we're going into one of the most open seasons in a very long time. He needs to keep his mouth shut if he wants to keep all of his points. It might mean that we will barely hear anything from the drivers throughout an entire season on any kind of issue whatsoever, for the risk of getting fined or bans or points lost. So now the GPDA is going to have to rely on somebody who is not an active F1 driver to speak up for them. Which actually did happen, sort of. It came from the GPDA president, Alex Wurz, and it does explain a lot as to why we only have just heard about it until maybe the last 36 hours or something, because I think I saw the first post back on the 29th of January or something like that. It's only like yesterday that it became major news amongst many F1 publications, because it wasn't attached to an F1 driver who is currently racing. And even then, what Alex said had nothing to do about the reaction of what was said. It's all to do about the mode in which they found out, as he says right here. Ahem. There was no consultation. We have read that through the media. Could be room for improvement that we, the FIA and the GPDA, are working out these things together. If it's a comparison with, for example, the NFL in America, they do have unionization of NFL players, and they are involved in the process. In this case, we are not involved. I'm not sure if the FIA has involved their own FIA Drivers Commission. That's something I don't know about. Let's hope that we don't have many fines being collected. So as you can tell, Wurz gave no indication of a formal response from the GPDA, only a quip right at the end going like, oh dear, we better not get fined for this, because the whole thing with Appendix B also comes with an asterisk, meaning that actually there's a 2-year review window. So that GPDA letter could easily come up for review if a steward decides to uphold that complaint from that article, or Ben Sulayem tells them to. So that means otherwise they would lose their job if they didn't. But I think them not being told in private before it went public was deliberate. This dropping of Appendix B was meant to spread chaos amongst the relevant parties, including the drivers and their teams, at the worst possible moment for everybody. In 2025, it's going to be a really competitive championship where it could be decided either drivers through losing points, or them facing suspension from competition for up to a month, which compromises their own championship prospects. And that's not something that can be ignored, with Toto Wolff fully aware that these can be implemented after just one offence, which might explain why the new Mercedes lead driver has been very conspicuous in his absence from discussions in relation to the GPDA. So maybe this is some sort of indirect strategy for how George Russell can win the Formula One World Championship. Make use of the fact that he has complete and total control of George Russell's destiny, because don't forget, George's contract is up at the end of the year, and he could stand to gain some points from his rivals, because George feels rather confident with the W16, and with Red Bull looking incredibly precarious at the moment, with Max Verstappen looking likely to have to drive at the limit for all of the entire season, Mercedes will not want Russell facing FIA scrutiny as the driver's spokesperson for the GPDA. Especially since many people will reckon Max will continue to run his mouth off without care, and Lewis will be unlikely to be silent about his causes which matter to him. So could Toto seek to exploit those character traits through lost points, and Mercedes gain that way? Maybe. But if there is anyone that Mr. Sulayem will want to slam down penalties on to teach drivers a lesson, it would be George. And that is not what Toto wants. So it really does make me think that the era of openness, the freedom of expression at Mercedes might be coming to an end, because there is no need to be that way anymore, because Lewis Hamilton isn't there anymore. That is one of the main reasons and one of the draws why Lewis left McLaren to go to Mercedes, because Ron Dennis was such a tyrant about what the drivers could and couldn't say, what they did, which sponsors they fraternized with. And partly why Niki Lauda and Toto were able to convince him to come to Mercedes is because they basically said, you can be who you want to be. And Lewis has thrived on that. His brand now transcends all Formula One teams. As Ferrari have seen very plainly, the impact of Lewis Hamilton on social media cannot be ignored. It is something which is ungodly. It's remarkably influential. Any team would want to suck from that. But Mercedes don't have that anymore. But at the same time, they have control now as to what their drivers say and don't say. I mean, sure, they are hiring a fashion consultant to make sure they can make the most of all of those fashion clicks and likes. But the truth is, though, is that George and Kimi are purebred Mercedes Junior drivers, which is all very well and good for bigging up the Mercedes Junior team, but essentially it does mean that they will fall into line with whatever Darth Toto says. If he tells them not to say something, they will not say something, because they know what's good for them. neither are these men likely to start a war with the FIA now they've clapped back with their own draconian measures. And another reason why I think this, that Toto might be really in the pocket of the FIA, and the days of George being the hero are numbered in regards to being a spokesperson or speaking out against change, which is negative for the drivers, is through the return of another classic Mercedes driver, Valtteri Bottas. His public image amongst Formula 1 fans after the last couple of years of being free to do so at Alfa Romeo and Sauber, and then of course we will touch upon again Toto's overall paper wealth. By bringing back Valtteri, it's a clear indicator that Mercedes wishes to claw back some of the fans and value that might have been lost with the departure of Hamilton. Now, whilst the value of Ferrari's F1 team will soar past $6 billion most likely in 2025, with Lewis being there, Mercedes will probably drop a fair bit or flatline unless they can bring back some titles to Brackley. Bottas is a legacy product of the good old days, and also quite a cultural symbol as well, with his trademark mullet, notable moustache, and his tendency to bare his cheeks. Yeah, about that. Yeah, it's become quite clear. It's one of those headlines that I mentioned at the beginning of this video that sort of swept me by. I looked at it and it was like, oh dear, that's a shame. But in the context of what we've been talking about today, this is something all the more telling about Mercedes and general public image, and Toto wishing to use his influence to exert what he feels is right for Mercedes. Because do not be expecting some of those nude calendars anymore, because as Toto said in his Planet F1 quote, and I'm saying this verbatim, "We are Mercedes, so perhaps a nude calendar is not on anymore." But this wasn't some bit of fun from Valtteri or anything, although his humour is quite surreal, and it also includes a very passionate obsession with The Simpsons, with him dressing up for a charity bike run as Duffman. Oh yeah! This was a charity effort! This generated $150,000 to go towards prostate cancer research, as well as the Movember cause, to which Valtteri is one of the patron saints of it, well, with his moustache and all that stuff. So this wasn't just some flippant thing that he did just because he could and that he was free to do so. What Toto is doing right now is completely cutting off a potential means of raising money for charity. The only compromise that Valtteri is getting right now is that he gets to keep his hairdo, even though Toto doesn't really like it. But only, I think that's because he's a reserve driver. He's mainly going to be working in the shadows, and he's not going to be a main driver anymore, so that is something to consider. If Toto had his way entirely, then he would have to shave off Valtteri his mullet and moustache. But at the same time, you know that's not going to happen, because the first image we found out when Mercedes confirmed it was a silhouette of that moustache and mullet. They are going to milk that part, but the butt stuff? No. No more butt stuff. Wait. Now, I might make light of this, but it's all in relation to something considerably serious. I didn't want to lean on the fact that the value of Toto's stock in the Mercedes F1 team depends on the integrity of F1 itself, but him being a paper billionaire is something to consider. And that if F1 and the FIA continue to clash on this matter, it will affect his retirement fund. I mean, again, we only have to look at how vociferous Toto Wolff was in defending the FIA and Formula 1 after FP1 was curtailed in Las Vegas 2023 after only 7 minutes, what with that manhole cover, Carlos Sainz almost breaking his spine because he got sucked up into his car, and then, of course, the FIA being incredibly draconian and not really even considering some mercy regarding the penalty, because he got a 10-place grid drop through no fault of his own. And then Ferrari had to pay $2 million worth of damages, to which I think they've not been compensated by the race organisers or the FIA. So that's still ongoing. And then Toto comes out and gives his passionate speech about how we shouldn't care about her manhole cover, that it will be something that we'll forget about. No, we haven't forgotten about it, Toto. And that discussion merely just reminded us that fact that, yeah, you're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars from all of this when you decide to call it a day. Yeah, it's very important that Formula 1 and the FIA continue to grow. So that's not lost on us anymore. And now what Toto has done in coming out in agreement with the FIA, yeah, that's basically a sign that George, yeah, no, we're not going to be hearing any more heroic speeches from him. And maybe the best that we can hope for is maybe him speaking out against Max Verstappen and calling him a bad guy or something, trying to then anger Max Verstappen to then swear or do stuff that costs him points, maybe even race bans, and therefore he's taken out of championship contention. And then Lewis might suddenly get passionate about his stuff, and then he might get slapped on with fines and points deductions, and then George Russell wins the championship by default because he was a good boy who said nothing. That could be easily an indirect strategy of Mercedes to try and get their way. So yeah, it's food for thought right there. It's not something that could happen, and if it did, then many people would just consider that championship win a hollow victory, and that basically they only got it because they were just goody two-shoes, Mercedes and George. But one thing is for sure, we will no longer see public displays from the GPDA akin to that open letter, or if we do, they will not be directly affiliated with any driver who currently races in Formula 1, but by those who are not running the risk of fines, and that might in turn not get as much coverage because they are not current Formula 1 drivers, and therefore they do not attract as much attention. And that is what I think the FIA is banking on, that because it's not coming from a big, very personable and influential mouth, that it will just get swept under the rug. The best that we can maybe hope for is maybe some backroom discussions between the GPDA and the FIA, talks that are kept from us, that we barely hear anything, only if there is an outcome, and then for it will be a really protracted statement. It'll be nice and simple. We'll see the effects eventually, diluting itself through the regulations, but yeah, we're not going to get any bombastic talks coming out or somebody dropping things unexpectedly anymore. No, this was pretty much that Appendix B there to stop all of that. Because these penalties are indeed there to silence any driver and make them behave, because it costs them points and they want to win world titles. They don't want to lose out on that stuff. The fines aren't an issue for them or the team. It's the points and the race bans that matter more. All for speaking their mind or speaking ill of anyone who represents the FIA or their president. I mean, this doesn't mean that we're not going to be hearing all the drivers rage against the system anymore, but don't count on hearing a peep from the Mercedes drivers anytime soon, since I reckon that Toto will want to capitalise on potential points taken from their rivals, or indeed drivers being removed entirely for up to a month. As well as, of course, upholding the Mercedes way of doing things. And now with Lewis Hamilton no longer there doing his own thing, Toto has not got to worry about that anymore, and it really does make you question the integrity of their relationship. Did Toto Wolff really mean all of the stuff that Lewis believed in, or was he just paying lip service just to get him to sign the dotted line and therefore build up that huge run of success? It really does make you think about their relationship. It's just so weird. You've only got to look at how Toto Wolff reacts to all of the Lewis news at Ferrari. It's like he's some sort of ex-partner or something like that. And it's going to continue, with many people going, oh, Lewis did this at Ferrari. What do you think, Toto? It won't stop. But it is food for thought. Much like my theory that perhaps the push of Ford to leap back into endurance racing in WEC might be a bigger mission of Red Bull's and theirs to keep Max Verstappen on side for that little bit longer, even if it's not as an F1 driver. To find out how I think a Red Bull Ford back endurance car might keep Verstappen sweet, go and watch this video next, straight after this one.